The Aztecs. The Aztecs were a Mesoamerican culture that flourished in central Mexico in the post-classic period from 1300 to 1521. The Aztec peoples included different ethnic groups of central Mexico, particularly those groups who spoke the Nahuatl language and who dominated large parts of Mesoamerica from the 14th to the 16th centuries. The Aztec Empire was a confederation of three city-states established in 1427: Tenochtitlan, the city-state of the Mexica or Tenochca, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. The Aztec culture of central Mexico included maize cultivation, the social division between nobility and commoners, a pantheon of gods featuring Tezcatlipoca, Tlaloc, and Quetzalcoatl, the calendric system of 365 days intercalated with another system of 260 days, and particular to the Mexica of Tenochtitlan was their patron god, Huitzilopochtli. From the 13th century, the Valley of Mexico was the heart of dense population and the rise of city-states. The Mexica were latecomers to the Valley of Mexico and founded the city-state of Tenochtitlan on unpromising islets in Lake Texcoco, later becoming the dominant power of the Aztec Triple Alliance. The Aztec Empire originated in 1427 as an alliance between the city-states Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. The empire reached its maximal extent in 1517, just prior to the arrival of a small group of Spanish conquistadors led by Hernan Cortés. Cortés, allied with city-states opposed to the Mexica, particularly the Nahuatl-speaking Tlaxcalteca, as well as other central Mexican polities, including Texcoco, its former ally in the Triple Alliance. After the fall of Tenochtitlan on August 13, 1521, and the capture of the Emperor Cuauhtemoc, the Spanish founded Mexico City on the ruins of Tenochtitlan. The Nahuatl words Aztecatl and Azteca mean people from Aztlan, a mythical place of origin for several ethnic groups in central Mexico. The term was not used as an endonym by Aztecs themselves, but it is found in the different migration accounts of the Mexica, where it describes the different tribes who left Aztlan together. To the Aztecs themselves, the word Aztec was not a name for any particular ethnic group. Rather, it was an umbrella term used to refer to several ethnic groups, not all of them Nahuatl-speaking, that claimed heritage from the mythic place of origin, Aztlan. In one account of the journey from Aztlan, Huitzilopochtli, the deity of the Mexica tribe, tells his followers on the journey that now, no longer is your name Azteca, you are now Mexitin, Mexica. There are many written texts by the indigenous people and Spaniards of the early colonial period that contain valuable information about pre-colonial Aztec history. Some of these manuscripts were entirely pictorial, often with glyphs. In the post-conquest era, many other texts were written in Latin script by either literate Aztecs or by Spanish friars who interviewed the native people about their customs and stories. There are also many accounts by Spanish conquerors who participated in Spanish invasion, such as Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who wrote a full history of the conquest. An invaluable source of information about many aspects of Aztec religious thought, political and social structure, as well as history of the Spanish conquest from the Mexica viewpoint, is the Florentine Codex. Produced between 1545 and 1576 in the form of an ethnographic encyclopedia written bilingually in Spanish and Nahuatl, by Franciscan friar Bernardin de Sahagud and indigenous informants and scribes, it contains knowledge about many aspects of pre-colonial society, from religion, the calendars, botany, zoology, trades, and crafts, and history. The Nahua peoples were not indigenous to the highlands of central Mexico, but gradually migrated into the region from somewhere in northwestern Mexico. Aztec, Nahuatl Azteca, means people from Aztlan, Aztlan being a mythical place of origin toward the north. The migration stories of the Mexica tribe tell how they traveled with other tribes, including the Tlaxcalteca, Tepaneca, and Acolua, but that eventually their tribal deity Huitzilopochtli, told them to split from the other Aztec tribes and take on the name Mexica. According to Aztec legend, in 1323, the Mexica were shown a vision of an eagle perched on a prickly pear cactus eating a snake. The snake indicated the location where they were to build their settlement. The Mexica founded Tenochtitlan on a small swampy island in Lake Texcoco, the inland lake of the basin of Mexico. The year of, foundation is usually given as 1325. In 1376, the Mexica royal dynasty was founded when Acamapichtli, son of a Mexica father and a Colua mother, was elected as the first Huey Tlatoani of Tenochtitlan. Moctezuma II is known to world history as the Aztec ruler when the Spanish invaders and their indigenous allies began their conquest of the empire in a 2-year-long campaign from 1519 to 1521. In 1517, Moctezuma received the first news of ships with strange warriors having landed on the Gulf Coast. He dispatched messengers to greet them and find out what was happening, and ordered his subjects in the area to keep him informed of any new arrivals. In 1519, he was informed of the arrival of the Spanish fleet of Hernán Cortés, who soon marched towards Tlaxcala, where he formed an alliance with the traditional enemies of the Aztecs. On November 8, 1519, Moctezuma II received Cortés and his troops and Tlaxcalan allies on the causeway south of Tenochtitlan, and he invited the Spaniards to stay as his guests in Tenochtitlan. Cuauhtémoc, the last independent Mexica Tlatoani, continued the defense of Tenochtitlan. The Aztecs were weakened by disease, and the Spanish enlisted tens of thousands of Indian allies, especially Tlaxcalans, for the assault on Tenochtitlan. After the siege and complete destruction of the Aztec capital, Cuauhtémoc was captured on August 13, 1521, marking the beginning of Spanish hegemony in central Mexico. The Spaniards held Cuauhtémoc captive until he was tortured and executed on the orders of Cortés, supposedly for treason, during an ill-fated expedition to Honduras in 1525. The highest class of Aztecs were the nobility. This status was hereditary and ascribed certain privileges to its holders, such as the right to wear particularly fine garments and consume luxury goods, as well as to own land and direct labor by commoners. The most powerful nobles were called lords, and they owned and controlled noble estates or houses, and could serve in the highest government positions or as military leaders. Nobles made up about 5% of the population. The second class were originally peasants, but later extended to the lower working classes in general. These poorer classes could become enslaved, for example, if they had to sell themselves into the service of a noble due to debt or poverty, but enslavement was not an inherited status among the Aztecs. Some of these people were landless and worked directly for a lord, whereas the majority of commoners were organized into calpolis, which gave them access to land and property. Commoners were able to obtain privileges similar to those of the nobles by demonstrating prowess in warfare. When a warfare took a captive, he accrued the right to use certain emblems, weapons, or garments, and as he took more captives, his rank and prestige increased. This folio from the Codex Mendoza shows the rearing and education of Aztec boys and girls, how they were instructed in different types of behavior, and how different types of labor, and how they were harshly punished for misbehavior. In the Aztec society, men were farmers, traders, craftsmen, and warriors, whereas women were expected to take the responsibility of the domestic sphere. Women could, however, also work outside the home as small-scale merchants, doctors, priests, and midwives. The main unit of Aztec political organization was the city-state, in Nahuatl called the Altepetl, meaning water mountain. Each Altepetl was led by a ruler, a Tlatoani, with authority over a group of nobles and a population of commoners. Altepetl were frequently composed of groups speaking different languages. Each Altepetl would see itself as standing in a political contrast to other Altepetl polities, and war was waged between Altepetl states. In the basin of Mexico, the Altepetl was composed of subdivisions called calpoli, which served as the main organizational unit for commoners. The Aztec Empire was more of a hegemonic confederacy than a single system of government. It did not exert supreme authority over the conquered lands. It merely expected taxes to be paid and exerted force only to the degree it was necessary to ensure the payment of taxes. The Aztecs did not generally interfere in local affairs as long as the tax payments were made and the local elites participated willingly. Compliance was secured by establishing and maintaining a network of elites related through intermarriage and different forms of exchange. Aztec society was organized around maize agriculture. Each family had their own garden plot where they grew maize, fruits, herbs, medicine, and other important plants. Chinampas were artificial islands on the lake that allowed the conversion of the shallow waters into highly fertile gardens that could be cultivated year-round. Chinampas were created from alternating layers of mud from the bottom of the lake and plant matter and other vegetation. These raised beds were separated by narrow canals, which allowed farmers to move between them by canoe. Chinampas were extremely fertile pieces of land and yielded on average 7 crops annually. It has been estimated that 1 hectare, about 2.5 acres of chinampa, would feed 20 individuals. The excess supply of food allowed a significant portion of the Aztec population to dedicate themselves to trades other than food production. Women weaved textiles from agave fibers and cotton. Men engaged in craft specializations such as the production of ceramics and of obsidian and flint tools, and of luxury goods such as beadwork, featherwork, and the elaboration of tools and musical instruments. Sometimes entire calpoles specialized in a single craft. Here you see an Aztec vessel typical of the Cholula region. This is an Aztec bowl designed for everyday use. The Pochteca were professional merchants who traveled from market to market seeking profits. The Pochteca were specialized long-distance merchants organized into exclusive guilds. They made long expeditions to all parts of Mesoamerica, bringing back exotic luxury goods, and they served as the judges and supervisors of the Tlatelolco market. Several types of money were in regular use. Small purchases were made with cacao beans. A small rabbit was worth 30 beans, for example. A turkey egg cost 3 beans, and a tamal cost a single bean. For larger purchases, standardized lengths of cotton cloth called quachli were used. The capital city of the Aztec Empire was Tenochtitlan, now the site of modern-day Mexico City. It was built on a series of islets in Lake Texcoco. The Great Pyramid of Tenochtitlan rose 50 meters above the city. The city was interlaced with canals, and the population was estimated at 200,000 people. The second largest city in the Valley of Mexico in the Aztec period was Texcoco, with some 25,000 inhabitants. The center of Tenochtitlan was the sacred precinct, a walled-off square area which housed the great temple, temples for other deities, the ball court, the Calmecac, a school for nobles, a skull rack displaying the skulls of sacrificial victims, and the houses of the warrior orders and a merchant's palace. Around the sacred precinct were the royal palaces built by the Tlatoanis. The Templo Mayor, or the Great Temple, was the centerpiece of Tenochtitlan. It was a large stepped pyramid with a double staircase leading up to 2 twin shrines, one dedicated to Tlaloc, the other to Huitzilopochtli. Most human sacrifices were done here. Aztec religion was organized around the practice of calendar rituals dedicated to a pantheon of different deities. Central in the religious practice was the offering of sacrifices to the deities as a way of thanking or paying for the continuation of the cycle of life. The main deities worshipped by the Aztecs were Tlaloc, a rain and storm deity, Huitzilopochtli, a solar and martial deity, and the head deity of the Mexica tribe, Quetzalcoatl, a wind, sky, and star deity and cultural hero, and Tezcatlipoca, a deity of the night, magic, prophecy, and fate. The great temple in Tenochtitlan had two shrines on its top, one dedicated to Tlaloc, the other to Huitzilopochtli. Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca each had separate temples. This is an Aztec cosmological drawing. The legend of the suns describes the creation of four successive suns, or periods, each ruled by a different deity and inhabited by a different group of beings. Each period begins in a cataclysmic destruction that sets the stage for the next period to begin. The deities Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl are adversaries, each destroying the creations of the other. The current sun, the fifth, was created when a minor deity sacrificed himself on a bonfire and turned into the sun. But the sun moved once other deities sacrificed themselves and offered it their life force. The creation of humans. In the story of the creation of humanity, Quetzalcoatl travels with his twin, Xolotl, to the underworld and brings back bones, which are then ground like corn on a metate by the goddess Cihuacoatl. The resulting dough is given human form and comes to life when Quetzalcoatl imbues it with his own blood. Huitzilopochtli was a deity specifically tied to the Mexica tribe. On their migration, Huitzilopochtli, in the form of a deity bundle carried by the Mexica priest, continuously spurred the tribe on by pushing them into conflict with their neighbors whenever they were settled in one place. In another myth, Huitzilopochtli defeated and dismembered his sister, a moon goddess, and her 400 brothers at the hill of Coatepetl. At the foot of the stairs on the southern side of the great temple was a large stone monolith carved with a representation of the dismembered goddess. The Aztecs used two calendars simultaneously, a ritual calendar of 260 days and a solar calendar of 365 days. Each day had a name and number in both calendars, and the combination of two dates were unique within a period of 52 years. The first calendar, the 260-day one, consisted of 20 day signs and number coefficients of 1 through 13 that cycled in a fixed order. The 365-day calendar was made of 18 months of 20 days, with a remainder of 5 void days at the end of the cycle before a new cycle began. Each 20-day month was named after the specific ritual festival that began the month. Every 52 years, the two calendars reached their shared starting point, and a new calendar cycle began. This calendar event was celebrated with a ritual known as the New Fire Ceremony. In this ceremony, old pottery was broken in all homes, and all fires in the Aztec realm were put out. Then a new fire was drilled over the breast of a sacrificial victim, and runners brought the new fire to the different Calpoli communities where fire was redistributed to each home. The night without fire was associated with the fear that star demons might descend and devour the earth, ending the 5th period of the sun. Song and poetry were highly regarded. There were presentations and poetry contests at most of the Aztec festivals. A remarkable amount of this poetry survives, having been collected during the era of the conquest. In some cases, the poetry is attributed to individual authors, such as Netzahualcoyotl, the Tlatoani of Texcoco. Two important types of sculpture are unique to the Aztecs and related to the context of ritual sacrifice. The eagle vessel, which were large stone bowls often shaped like eagles or jaguars, used as a receptacle for extracted human hearts, and a monumental carved stone disc to which war captives were tied and sacrificed in a form of gladiatorial combat. Mexico City was built on the ruins of Tenochtitlan, gradually replacing and covering the lake, the island, and the architecture of Aztec Tenochtitlan. After the fall of Tenochtitlan, Aztec warriors were enlisted as auxiliary troops alongside the Spanish Tlaxcalteca allies, and Aztec forces participated in all of the subsequent campaigns of conquest in northern and southern Mesoamerica. Aspects of Aztec culture and the Nahuatl language continued to expand during the early colonial period as Aztec auxiliary forces made permanent settlements in many of the areas that were put under the Spanish crown. After the Aztec Empire fell, some of its highest elites continued to hold elite status in the colonial era. The Spanish recognized the indigenous elites as nobles in their colonial system, maintaining the status distinction of the pre-conquest era, and they used these noblemen as intermediaries between the Spanish colonial government and their communities. Indigenous governors were in charge of the colonial political organization of the Indians. In particular, they enabled the continued functioning of the tax and obligatory labor of commoner Indians to benefit the Spanish holders of encomiendas. Encomiendas were private grants of labor and taxes from particular indigenous communities to particular Spaniards, replacing the Aztec overlords with Spanish ones. Some indigenous governors became quite rich and influential and were able to maintain positions of power comparable to that of Spanish encomenderos. The late 19th century in Mexico was a period in which Aztec civilization became a point of national pride. Aztec symbols and mythology were promoted by the Mexican government and integrated into contemporary Mexican nationalism as emblems of the country. The Mexican Revolution, which lasted from 1910 to 1920, with significant participation of indigenous people in the struggle in many regions, ignited a broad government-sponsored political and cultural movement of indigenismo, with symbols of Mexico's Aztec past becoming ubiquitous, most especially in Mexican muralism of Diego Rivera. The Nahuatl language is today spoken by 1.5 million people, mostly in mountainous areas in the states of central Mexico. Mexican Spanish today incorporates hundreds of loans from Nahuatl. Many of these words have passed into general Spanish use and further into other world languages. For example, Nahuatl words for foods have been borrowed by Spanish and other languages around the world. For example, chocolate, tomato, chili, avocado, tamale, taco, pupusa, chipotle, pozole, and atole.